Haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Kuf Zayin Amud Beis. Starting on Daf Kuf Zayin Amud Aleph, 2 lines from the bottom. The Mishnah states in the beginning of the Perek, Erev Psachim, Samuch la Mincha, Lo Yochal Adam Asher Techshach. Now Mincha can mean from a period of time, from a half an hour after Chatzois, all the way until sunset, until Shkia, because that was corresponding to the Korban Tamid. And therefore, beginning with a half an hour after Chatzois, that's Mincha Gedoyla. That's the time that a person can daven Mincha, which again is the earliest time that they would be able to makriv the Korban Tamid Shel Ben Harabayim. However, typically they only were makriv the Korban Tamid Shel Ben Harabayim only 9.5 hours into the day, which then corresponds to the time of Mincha Ketana. So the Mincha that we're talking about needs to be clarified. When the Mishnah states you cannot eat on Erev Pesach Samuch la Mincha, 1/2 hour before Mincha, does that mean the Mincha Gedoyla, which means from the time of Chatzois, or from the Mincha Ketana, from the beginning of the 10th hour after the 9th hour? Ask the Gemara, Iboilahu, Samuch la Mincha Gedoyla Tanan? Did our Mishnah teach Samuch la Mincha Gedoyla? Again, that would mean a half an hour before Mincha Gedoyla, which would be Chatzois Hayoim. Or Dilma Samuch la Mincha Ketana Tanan? Or does it mean to say a half an hour before the time Mincha Ketana? And since Mincha Ketana is 9.5 hours into the day, it would be a half an hour before that, the beginning of the 10th hour. The Gemara explains, Samuch la Mincha Gedoyla Tanan. On the one hand, maybe the Mishnah means Samuch la Mincha Gedoyla. Umishum Pesach Dilma Osi lemimshach va'osi leimnuye ma'aved pischa. The Gemara says if it's samuch lemincha gedoyla, the concern would be that since that's the time when there begins the obligation of bringing the Korban Pesach, that's bein harboim, that's in the afternoon of the Yudalid Nisan. So therefore, the concern would be that if a person begins a Suda and starts eating, he may get carried away with the Suda and neglect bringing the Korban Pesach. Or Dilma, Samuch lemincha ketana tanan. Or maybe the Mishnah means Samuch a half an hour before Mincha Ketana. Umishum mitzvah matzah, Dilma asi lemichla lematzah achila gasa. And if you would then eat at such a time, you would then be filled up, whereby you will not eat the matzah other than eating it be'ichila gasa. Now, ichila gasa can mean one of two things. Either you're eating to the point where you're full and you're still eating, whereby you're not going to enjoy the matzah, it won't be behidir mitzvah. Or it means that you will not eat it properly at all because you're so full, you have to force yourself to eat, whereby the achila gasa is not shmei achila. It's not fulfilling the mitzvah of be'erev toichlu matzahs at all. Omar Ravina said, Toshma, let's bring a proof. Afilu Agrippus HaMelech shehu rogil le'echol b'tisha shois. Agrippus HaMelech was a kosher king from the Hashmonai kingdom, and he was accustomed to eating his first meal 9 hours into the day, the beginning of the 9th hour. And therefore, the Brisa says on that day, referring to Erev Pesach, Yudalid ben Nisan, he would not eat until Teshach. That means he would fast, he would wait to eat until nightfall, until time for the Seder. So, if you want to say we're talking about the Mishnah, Samuch lemincha ketana, then it's very well, because Haini Rebused da Agrippus, then we have a Chiddush about Agrippus, that even though he normally eats only 9 hours into the day, by him beginning that Suda, it would go into the time improperly, whereby he himself then desisted, he waited not to eat until the nightfall, until the Leil HaSeder. Then we have a big Chiddush. But if you're going to say the Mishnah means Samuch lemincha gedoyla, then my Rebused Agrippus, what was the Chiddush that Agrippus did not eat? Hooray, he couldn't eat for hours before. Chal Yisra aleh mikara, already from the time of Chatzois. Ella, the Gemara says, Samuch lemincha ketanetnan. must be that we're talking about Samuch Lemincha Ketana. Again, a half an hour before the Zman of Mincha Ketana, which would be then 9.5 hours in the day is Mincha Ketana. 1/2 hour before that is the meaning of the 10th hour. The Gemara says, Soif, my rebus da Agrippus, still, what would be the Chiddush in Agrippus? Ha matya le Zman Isura. Behold, it comes to a Zman of Isura. So therefore, if he begin his Su'udah between the 9th and the 10th hour, and that Suda would certainly carry into the 10th hour. So what's the Chiddush? Asked the Gemara in the Brisa, that Agrippus did not eat in his normal time of the 9th hour. Gemara answers, Ma, with this same, you might think to say, Teisha shows la Agrippus, Ke'arba shows Didontami. His 9th hour, since that's his first meal, is like our first meal, which is typically eaten in the 4th hour. And if that's the case, then just like we can eat in the 4th hour and we still have an appetite, we can go ahead and eat and fulfill the mitzvah of Ba'erev Toichlu Matzos, so too he can eat in the 9th hour. And since he's accustomed to eating in the 9th hour, he certainly has an appetite when he eats his second meal at night to eat the matzos. Kalmashma lo, no, we say even Agrippus, who normally eats his meal at the beginning of the 9th hour, his first meal, still he must desist from eating that meal and wait until nightfall. The Gemara now, once it's stated that it's also to eat samuch lemincha, and we concluded now mincha ketana, so it doesn't mean, the Gemara now explains, that means you cannot eat at all. It just means you can't eat things that are going to be masbiyah, will satiate. For example, matzah ashira. Says the Gemara, Omar Rabbi Yosi, oh aval matbil hu b'minei targima. You could go ahead and dip your meats and your vegetables, your fruit, things that you would eat, peiros, that they would typically eat them with dipping. These are things that are not eaten to satiation. Rabbi Yitzchak matbil b'yarki. The Gemara says that Rabbi Yitzchak, he would be dipping his vegetables. Tanya Nami Hoch. We also have a brisa that supports that one can indeed eat on Erev Pesach, just not things that are satiating. Hashamish madnil mivnei me'ayin v'noisin lifnei ha'orchim. The shamish, he would dip the intestines, the meat, and he would even give them out to the guests to eat as well. And the brisa goes on to say, even though it's not a proof that one may eat, but there's even a support for this. And in fact, this support not only is mashma that one can eat, but one shall eat, not to satiation, but enough to then open up his intestines, enough to then whet his appetite. Shenemar, it says in the pasuk, Niru lochem nir, va'al tizru el koitzim. Plow for yourselves a plow, meaning a furrow, and do not then seed, the pasuk says, the koitzim. That means to say that only when a person plows the field, he gets the ground ready to then accept the makabel, the zera, then it's going to then grow forth in a productive way. If he does not do that, then he's going to then bring koitzim. He's going to bring things that are thorns. So too, this is a smach, a support for eating before Pesach, on Erev Pesach, that a person should then eat these type of things of meat and yerokos and peiros in order to then whet his appetite, in order to then eat the achilas matzah with greater strength, with greater vigor. Rava havashasi chamra kuli mali yoimei de pischa. The Gemara recounts that Rava would drink a lot of wine on Erev Pesach. Kihech de gigurei lilibe denecha matzah tfeila orta, so that he will then whet his appetite and eat the matzah in a stronger, more vigorous fashion. Omar Rava said, Mino amina lo dechamra migragarer. Where do I know to say and to misnaheg in such a way to drink a lot of wine on Erev Pesach? This nan, it states, we're on top of Kuf Ches Amar Aleph, Ben HaKoises halolu im rotza lishtos yishte. The Mishnah says, lekamon, if a person wants to drink between these koisos, namely between the first and second kois, or between the second and third kois, he may do so. Ben shlish lerevi lo yishte. But between the third and the fourth, he shall not because that'll be nirashe moisif ala koisos, on the dalek koisos. Vi amris misad soid. If you're going to say that indeed by drinking wine will satiate, then amay yishte. Why does it permit you to drink wine between the first and second, the second and third koisos? That means between the first and second kos, between kiddush and the second kos, which is after the magid, and between the second kos and the third kos. How are you then able to then drink so much if it's going to then cause you to be satiated? It'll cause you to then eat matzah b'achila gasa if you're going to be satiated. Certainly, the Mishnah is not going to then permit and encourage a person, say if he wants to drink, he can do so. If it's going to then pogeya in the mitzvah achilas matzah. Ela shmamina migrar gar. Rather, Rava says you can prove from here that indeed, by drinking a lot, not a little bit, because a little bit will satiate, but a lot of wine, then that will actually whet the appetite. And that's what Rava's minhag was to do on Erev Pesach, to drink a lot of wine. The Gemara recounts Rav Sheshes have a Yosef b'tanisa komali yoyma de pischa. Rav Sheshes was noiheg, the opposite, not to eat anything at all on Erev Pesach. The Gemara says, Neima kasova Rav Sheshes samuch lemincha gedolatnan. Let us suggest that the reason why Rav Sheshes did not eat anything all day on Erev Pesach, already from the morning, is because he held that it's aser to eat already samuch lemincha gedola. Why? As we stated before, mishum pischahu, because of the Korban Pesach, dilma mimshach va'osi li'imnuye ma'abed bepischahu. Maybe he will get so carried away from his eating, whereby he will then not bring the Korban Pesach. V'sover lo ki hoda amar Rav Shaya amar Rabbi Elazar, and he holds like the shita of Rav Shaya amar Rabbi Elazar. What is that shita? That shita is machshir haya ben beseira pepesach sheshachtu shachris ba'arba salishmoy. He permitted the Korban Pesach to be shechted in the morning lishmoy. Umitzafres man pischahu de kuliyoyma chazi lepischa. The sover ben arboim ben erev de esmo le erev de idna. He held that the entire day of Erev Pesach is already the chiyuv to bring the Korban Pesach, not just like as we normally understand, like the other opinion that says that it's only from the afternoon, as we learn bein ha'arboim to mean between the arboim. That means when it begins becoming darker, that means after chatzos, a half an hour after chatzos, until nightfall. He's learning no. Bein ha'arboim means bein ha'erev the esmo, the night before, le'erev da'idna, to tonight's night. That means he's learning the entire day has the chiyuv of a Korban Pesach, whereby this shita would say that he is concerned that if you will get carried away with a meal, you may not bring the Korban Pesach altogether. So therefore, already from the beginning of the day, Rav Sheshes did not eat. Omrei, they said, loy. That's not the kavanah of Rav Sheshes, why he did not eat from the beginning of the day. Really, as we said before, that the Mishnah has an iser of samuch lemincha, mincha ketana. But shiny Rav Sheshes, the istin is hava. Rav Sheshes was different. He was a particularly sensitive personality. He was so sensitive that if he would eat already from the beginning of the day, he may not have a proper appetite for the matzah at night. So therefore, that's the reason why Rav Sheshet did not eat already from the morning. Not because he held that the time of mincha, the time of samuch lemincha means samuch from mincha gedola, and he held that indeed the Korban Pesach is to be brought from the beginning of the day. No, he held indeed that mincha, samuch lemincha means mincha ketana. But he was concerned that in his natural state, if he would eat something, he would not have an appetite for the mitzvah at night. So therefore he desisted from eating already from the beginning of the day, and he was noyeg to be misaneh already from the time of Erev Pesach, from the time that he woke up until then, to eat the matzah on Erev Pesach.